Hi, I'm Dr. Linda Carney, and welcome to Diabetes, More Health, Less Medicine. In this hour, we're going to be studying about the diabetes epidemic. As you know, diabetes is spreading rapidly. Many people are being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, the adult onset type, every day. What causes it? Is it all in our genetics? Do we have any role to play in helping ourselves outrun a genetic strike against us? There's a lot of hope in the message that I'm bringing to you tonight, because even if you've got a genetic strike against you, like I do, both my parents were diabetic, but even if you've got that genetic strike against you, I wanted to let you know that there are things that you can do, things from the natural world that you can do, that will help you to decrease your dependence on medication and maybe even reverse your diabetes type 2 altogether. That's my goal. More health, less medicine. Let's get started. What is it that's causing the diabetes epidemic in our country? The majority of people believe that if their parents had diabetes, it's inevitable that they'll get it too. And they may have a genetic predisposition to it. However, inheritance not only is in genes, but also we seem to, quote, inherit eating patterns. Eating patterns have a great deal to do with the development of type 2 diabetes. This is known as the adult onset diabetes. It used to be called non-insulin dependent diabetes. However, many people are now needing insulin to control their type 2 diabetes, or at least they're told by their physicians that they must have injectable medicines such as insulin or some of the newer non-insulin injectables in order to control their blood sugars. But is that really the case? Are we doomed to the needle? I don't think so. And I offer you an idea that if you explore it will give you the key to why so many people have diabetes and how you can outrun even a genetic tendency towards yours. And that key is insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is the concept of having plenty of insulin around, unlike the type 1 diabetic who must inject insulin into their body every day in order to live. Insulin resistance is plenty of insulin around, but the insulin isn't working right. Something seems to have paralyzed the insulin. What could be doing that? Let's explore the role of food in diabetes type 2. Many people think that diabetes type 2 is the inability to metabolize your carbohydrates or sugars, and so they mistakenly reason that eating too much sugar causes type 2 diabetes. But actually, the truth is, eating too much fat in our diet, dietary fat, can cause diabetes. How? Through the mechanism of insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is where insulin doesn't work right because it's been paralyzed by too much fat in the diet. Here's a little illustration to help you see it more clearly. So picture that this is a muscle cell, and in that muscle cell we've got a door, and that door has a doorknob with a lock. Insulin is trying to get his key in the lock. You see, insulin has taken sugar by the hand. Sugar, or glucose, the simplest form of carbohydrate, cannot get into the muscle cell by herself. Why does muscle cell need the glucose? The muscle needs the glucose to be strong, to have energy. And so the glucose is trying to get out of the bloodstream because high blood sugar is not a good thing. So the glucose is trying to get out of the bloodstream into the muscle cell, but it needs insulin's key to open the lock in that door in muscle cell. If there's too much dietary fat, that dietary fat acts as if it were stuffed into the lock in muscle's door. That dietary fat stuffed in the lock prevents insulin's key from entering in and opening the door. Insulin's key won't fit. There's too much fat stuffed in the lock. That's the way you can think of it. That's how dietary fat paralyzes the effect of insulin. And so insulin has his shoulder against the door, pushing, trying to get that door open. But the door won't open, so glucose stays in the bloodstream, raising the level of blood sugar. And the muscle doesn't have any energy just cold and forlorn without the glucose that it needed to grow, be strong and energetic. The pancreas, meanwhile, is tasting the blood that's flowing by, saying, too sweet. My job is to produce insulin. So the pancreas produces more and more insulin, but the pancreas works nights, weekends, holidays. The pancreas works overtime. The pancreas burns itself out after a few years of producing so much insulin. What happens to the insulin level? The insulin level rises, but because it's not working right, it doesn't overcome the high level of blood sugar, and the blood sugar level rises. When the pancreas burns out and can no longer produce sufficient insulin, then the person needs to take insulin shots until they learn the mechanism whereby they can get the fat out of the lock in muscle's door so that insulin's key can work again. But if a person does not heed the warning signs when the doctor measures blood tests such as hemoglobin A1C, a 3-month average of blood sugars, if the patient doesn't listen when the doctor says, you're pre-diabetic, watch out, and do the changes that are needed, then the person may progress onto full-blown diabetes. And sometimes the immune system can be stimulated to make autoantibodies against your own beta cells in the islets of Langerhans. This is called diabetes 1.5. Not diabetes type 1, not diabetes type 2. It's called LADA, L-A-D-A, latent autoimmune diabetes of the adult, because the person has not made autoantibodies in childhood against their beta cells that produce the insulin in the pancreas, but has made them as an adult. However, back to type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes can be overcome if we get dietary fat out. Why? Because we know that dietary fat paralyzes insulin. How do we know that? Well, let me illustrate with 2 examples. One is a scientific study. It was at Vanderbilt University many years ago, and the researchers said, okay guys, we're going to take 100 healthy men, no diabetes in the family, no past history of diabetes in the men themselves, and we're going to feed you 2 types of diet. One is high in sugar, low in fat. One is high in fat and low in sugar. And we're going to see which diet brings on the symptoms like diabetes. So the men agreed and the study started. And first, they fed them the high-fat, low-sugar diet. They were going to feed them this diet for about 30 days, but they had to stop after about 2 weeks. All 100 of these men were showing signs of diabetes. Their blood sugars were rising dangerously, all from too much fat in their diet. Whoa, the researchers said. So they got them on a diet that had much, much lower fat, reversed the diabetes, and within 4 months or so, they repeated the study, but this time with the high sugar, low fat diet. The same 100 guys, now about 5 or 6 months older, were fed this diet of high sugar, low fat, and not one of them became diabetic. Thus, Vanderbilt University discovered decades ago that high fat in the diet is the principal cause of insulin resistance and the underlying mechanism of type 2 diabetes. Insulin gets paralyzed when we eat too much dietary fat. And when a type 1 diabetic takes in dietary fat, the type 1 diabetic realizes that it's going to take more insulin shots over the next 7 to 10 days to get their blood sugars back down to normal. They're going to struggle for approximately 7 to 10 days if their diet gets contaminated with dietary fat. What, doctor? Even plant-based fats? Yes, even vegan fats like oils, nuts, seeds, avocado. If there's fat in the diet, it's harder for the type 1 diabetic to control their blood sugar. But doctor, how can we get a fat-free diet? Well, pardon me because I misspoke. I said if there's fat in the diet, and what I should have said was if there's added fat in the diet. Because you can't get the fat out of many different foods. In fact, strawberries have more than 10% of their calories coming from fat. Kale, 13% of the calories from fat. Who knew? And so there are many foods that have an inherent amount of fat in them, just the right amount. But there are some foods that are very, very high in fat, like the nuts and seeds. And of course, oils is a fat removed from its fiber, which makes it particularly dangerous for type 2 diabetes. There are 4 factors that we need to consider. As I look at patients who become diabetic, I see these 4 factors at play. Would you like to know what they are? Let me list them for you. Factor number 1, we really need a low-fat, whole food, plant-based diet of unprocessed foods without added oils in order to not become diabetic if we've got a genetic strike against us. To eat these foods at 3 different meals a day, to limit snacking, and to get the last meal eaten before 6:30 p.m. because late night eating really pushes you towards diabetes if you have a genetic strike against you. So when we limit our foods to 3 meals a day and no snacking in between, we have a much better chance of outrunning diabetes, especially if that is a low-fat, whole food, plant-based diet of unprocessed foods. Factor number 2, exercise. Exercise is really important for preventing type 2 diabetes. The kind of exercise that you could get may vary depending on your age, where you're at in life, and what you enjoy doing. If you exercise for an hour every day, 6 or 7 days a week, it's going to help you tremendously to not be the next victim of type 2 diabetes, even if both your parents were diabetic. To exercise is to consider the 3 components of fitness: flexibility, cardiovascular, and strength. Many people would do well to take a 30-minute walk every day. It's easy on the joints. It's really helpful. Walk, walk, walk. Try and walk that diabetes away. And then about 20 minutes of weightlifting. Weightlifting is a good thing because it strengthens your bones and muscles, helps prevent osteoporosis. It's really good for cancer prevention also. But back to diabetes, it works wonders when your muscles have had exercise. They can burn carbohydrate or sugars much more efficiently. And don't forget stretching, because a muscle that isn't flexible is a muscle that could get injured. You don't want to start out too heavy in your exercise program until you have built up to a level of fitness. So start slow, use many reps, low weights, and don't overdo it at first. But exercise regularly. Try to get in at least an hour a day if you can. 30 minutes of walking, 20 minutes of strength training, and 5 minutes each of warm-up, stretching, cool-down, stretching. That's a really good way to help you never become a victim of type 2 diabetes. The third factor are certain substances that make type 2 diabetes much, much more likely. You wouldn't think that just a beer a day could push somebody over the edge into prediabetes, but I've seen it happen. In young, healthy vegans, I've seen it happen. What's a vegan? A vegan is a person who doesn't use animal products in their diet. They're like a vegetarian, but without the eggs and the cheese. If a person has alcohol in their diet, it dramatically increases their risk of type 2 diabetes. But so can other products that are fermented. Vinegars, kombucha, miso, tempeh. Oh my goodness. Now those are fighting words because many people think that fermentation is a good thing. Many people, especially here in the South where I practice, believe that apple cider vinegar is good for health, and I don't think so. The reason I don't is because it swells the airway when you ingest something that was fermented. And airway swelling can increase the risk of allergies or limit your airflow at night. This brings us to factor number 4. Factor number 4 is sleep. The importance of sleep in preventing diabetes is very hard to understand for most people. They really don't think it has anything to do with weight loss or preventing diabetes. But getting to bed by 9:30 every night so that you're asleep by 10 p.m. is really helpful if you've got a genetic strike against you for type 2 diabetes. Why is that? Well, without getting into all the hormones, cortisol, ghrelin, leptin, these hormones regulate weight and appetite. And weight and appetite are very important for diabetes. Staying up late dramatically increases your risk of type 2 diabetes. even if there's no family history of type 2 diabetes. Try hard to get to bed before 10 p.m. so that you're sound asleep by 10 p.m. 2 hours of sleep before midnight are worth 4 hours of sleep after midnight when it comes to outrunning type 2 diabetes. There's another factor to consider when we consider the fourth factor, sleep. That factor is sleep apnea. What is sleep apnea? Sleep apnea is when the airway closes at night. Usually it's the tongue falling back, but if you've had a nose injury, your nose could have problems on the inside that you may not even be aware of that may be limiting your airflow at night. So the whole airway could be involved in sleep apnea. Many people who have sleep apnea have no idea that they have it. Apnea is made of two Greek roots. The prefix a means without, like absence means you're not there, and amoral means without morals. And pnea, P-N-E-A, means breathing. And so apnea literally means without breathing, or to stop breathing. But some people have a narrowed airway that isn't completely closed off. They're still getting air, but it's a narrowed amount. It's not enough to support their metabolism, especially their metabolism of glucose. And their insulin resistance rises because they don't burn fat effectively. So they're wearing too much fat on their body, meaning they're carrying too much adipose tissue. And this makes it really much easier for them to become insulin resistant. If we have sleep apnea and we don't treat it, you can do all three of the first factors perfectly: the low-fat plant-based diet with no added oils, the exercising every day, no alcohol, caffeine, or vinegar. Factor number 3 is the toxic substances. You can do all those things perfectly, but if you don't get to bed before 10 p.m. or you have untreated sleep apnea, you might still become diabetic. Ask me how I know. I have patients who have been in that very category. Sleep apnea is a big factor for diabetes, and it's not only the overweight people who have sleep apnea. I have teenagers in my practice, skinny, normal appearing teenagers that have sleep apnea simply because they were born with petite throats. There are 8-year-olds in my practice who are not overweight who have sleep apnea. You can test it by measuring the level of oxygen on a little finger pulse oximeter that you can wear as you sleep overnight, and the doctor can plug it into the computer and run a report. And we can find out if your oxygen is going too low, below 94%. If it is, that doesn't mean that you have sleep apnea, because that test is too simplistic to diagnose sleep apnea, but sleep hypoxemia can be a factor in knowing who to test in the sleep lab for sleep apnea. So, the 4 factors again. We need a low-fat, plant-based diet, 3 meals a day or less. Some people do well on 2 meals a day. And no snacking, and get those calories in before 6:30 p.m. Number 2, daily exercise. It's really key. Try not to do any texting or watching the news on the internet or TV watching or emailing if you're not walking. Try to walk as you're in front of your computer screen. If there's any way that you can set up a treadmill computer, that really helps to outrun a genetic strike against you for diabetes. Factor number 3, caffeine, alcohol, vinegar, and other fermented products can be factors that'll push you over the edge to insulin resistance. Caffeine is implicated in insulin resistance. And factor number 4, sleep. Get to bed by 10 p.m. and treat sleep apnea if you've got it. Insulin is a hormone made by the pancreas. Insulin has 2 side effects. Makes you hungry, makes you store fat. Who needs those side effects? We all have enough problems fighting against food cravings as it is. And so there are certain substances that you can take in that will increase your body's insulin resistance and make insulin levels rise. What are those substances? Caffeine, for one. Why give yourself a dose of caffeine in coffee, tea, soda, or even chocolate, which has tiny amounts of caffeine? Why give yourself a dose that's going to boost your insulin levels, which will make you more likely to be hungry and more likely to store fat instead of burn fat? Being overweight dramatically increases the risk of type 2 diabetes. When we are overweight, every fat cell in our body is a factor promoting insulin resistance. When we stay up too late, we're dramatically risking type 2 diabetes worsening. A lack of exercise is very important in the development of type 2 diabetes. Let's look at some stories of hope from the Engine 2 Immersion. The Engine 2 Immersion is a wonderful program run by Rip Esselstyn and his team. He first started doing this for the employees of Whole Foods markets. Twice a year, in the spring and the fall, Whole Foods Market would fly in their employees to a beautiful resort just north of Austin, Texas. I practice just south of Austin, Texas, and this wonderful retreat was a time for the employees of Whole Foods Market and some members of the public to eat a low-fat, plant-based diet, no meat, no dairy, no eggs, no oil, in a beautiful setting where there were other people around them who could not only hear the lectures, but have fun learning how to do this together, learning how to prepare food together, and eating together, and enjoying a beautiful camp-like setting. This privilege was given to the employees of Whole Foods Market free of charge and paid for by their very generous employer, who understood the value of bringing world-class lecturers before them, like T. Colin Campbell, PhD, nutritional biochemist from Cornell University, or Caldwell Esselstyn Jr., MD, Cleveland Clinic surgeon, Bronze Star winner in Vietnam, Olympic gold medalist 1956 rowing. Dr. Esselstyn is inspiring, to say the least. And these two men, Drs. Campbell and Esselstyn, starred in a movie called Forks Over Knives, which shows how the importance of a low-fat, plant-based diet can help reverse diseases. Yes, there were diabetics among the employees of Whole Foods Market who came to the Engine 2 Immersion to eat the food that was all you can eat, buffet style. They could have seconds and thirds. It wasn't a diet of deprivation. And the employees of Whole Foods Market loved the food. They ate all they could eat, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and yes, they were given snacks too. And when these people had their blood drawn, I was fortunate to be hired by Rip Esselstyn as the medical director for the first 7 immersions that were held by the Engine 2 team. And my staff drew the blood on Mondays and Fridays of the immersion week. And we saw cholesterols fall 100 points in 5 days. We saw triglycerides fall 188 points for one lady in 5 days. When this happened, we were able to get some type 2 diabetics completely off their insulin. We were able to help people with high blood pressure not need their medication anymore because their blood pressure had resolved to normal on the low-fat plant-based diet. And were we exercising them 8 hours a day? No, actually. We were lecturing to them in a classroom setting 8 hours a day. Yes, they were sitting 8 hours a day. Did we offer them exercise? Yes, we offered them 1 hour of supervised exercise with world-class trainers like Nathan Turner of Sport Speed in Austin. And these hours of exercise were not mandatory. They were voluntary. They were optional. Of course, we encouraged them to exercise, and the people who came to the immersion were motivated people, so they wanted to exercise, but nobody forced them. And they weren't exercising 8 hours a day. No, they were learning the science behind a plant-based diet and how eating a low-fat plant-based diet without meat, dairy, eggs, oil could reverse diabetes, lower their cholesterol, help them to prevent cancer, and help them to resolve their high blood pressure. Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn's wife, Anne, gave demonstrations that were practical to help people to know what to buy. And we had talent shows, and in a setting of group support where people were all doing it together, people felt like, hey, this is doable. I like this food. And my job was the fun part. When people's blood pressure began to drop, it was my happy privilege to take people off blood pressure medicine. As those participants ate low-fat, plant-based food, their requirements for insulin would drop, And many times I would have to cut insulin doses 20% each day. Yes, for the type 1 diabetics too. I had to cut their doses of insulin lower and lower. A type 1 diabetic will never be able to do completely without insulin, but insulin requirements can be cut in half eating a low-fat plant-based diet, and that's a message of hope. And yes, there were some successful, deliriously happy people who got to throw away those needles and no longer need their insulin injections because they were type 2 diabetics who had overcome their insulin resistance with a low-fat plant-based diet. But you say, Dr. Carney, I'm not an employee of Whole Foods. I'm not lucky enough to go take a week off and go to the Engine 2 immersion. And I understand. There are 3 steps that you need to know to be successful if you would like to reverse your diabetes type 2 and have more health with less medicines. Those 3 steps are, number 1, you need to know the what and the why. What do I need to do and why do I need to do it? Number 2, you need to know the practical how. How do I make this work with my picky kids, with my busy schedule, with my limited budget? How do I make a plant-based diet work when I'm so busy I don't even have time to eat breakfast? And number 3, the psychology of it. How do you stick with something that may be hard at first, that may be a learning curve at first? How do you stick with it for the long term? How do you keep doing the simple, perhaps unglamorous steps over and over and over until you traverse all the way into health? That's what the Engine 2 immersion helps people to understand. The what and the why, the how, and the psychology of it. But you can learn this too. There are websites that can help you, and I recommend www.engine2diet.com. That's a great resource. And engine2extra.com is a food coaching site that, for a very minimal cost, will hold your hand every step of the way and has many embedded books and videos, cooking demonstrations to show you how. Let me illustrate one book that has helped many of my patients. Here I have Dr. Neil Barnard's program for reversing diabetes. This is not only a cookbook, it's a science book with stories of hope in it to help people to understand how a low-fat, plant-based diet without meat, dairy, eggs, or oil can help you, and plus it's got great recipes in it too. You can buy it at your bookstore, you can buy it in book form or paper, and I highly recommend this book. I also recommend 30-Day Diabetes Miracle by Dr. Franklin House, MD. There are other books that are not specifically about diabetes, but if you use these other books' recipes, you're going to find that all the health problems can be significantly improved. Here we have Engine 2 Diet book, which is great, and Rip Esselstyn, Austin's former vegan firefighter, has written a second book, My Beef with Meat, which is also an excellent cookbook like this one. Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease is written by Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn Jr., MD, of the Cleveland Clinic. He's a world-famous surgeon who has written a book so powerful that it has helped many celebrities save their lives and overcome their heart disease, lowering their cholesterol, and no longer needing medications. Dr. John McDougall has written a book called The Starch Solution, and I highly recommend this book. This is a wonderful book, and the McDougall program in Santa Rosa, California has helped many, many people reverse their diabetes. I am indebted to wonderful scientists such as Dr. McDougall, Neil Barnard, T. Colin Campbell, Caldwell Esselstyn Jr., MD. These people have paved the way with their integrity and their scientific research and their publications that have inspired me to help my patients to overcome their type 2 diabetes. And I hope that the things that you're learning in this presentation will inspire you to take your health into your own hands. You can control your diabetes and you can reverse it. Will it be easy? It may not be. However, it's well worth doing. There's another website that can be of great help. www.starch-smart.com is my website, and it's a social media networking website for people who would like to share recipes. It's free. Check it out at www.starchsmart.com. It also has blogs, and members can blog for free. They can blog their journey, post their pictures. There's social networking that's very helpful, because when you realize you're not alone in it, it just becomes easier to follow this way of eating. One of the blogs that's my favorite is by Ken Thomas. He's a type 1 diabetic who has chosen to share his story, his successes, with many people. Although Ken has had type 1 diabetes for many, many years, he does not have any of the complications of type 1 diabetes. He doesn't have any visual trouble, kidney trouble, cardiovascular disease, no heart disease. His blood sugars are exemplary. His blood sugars are great. Ken Thomas follows a diet that is completely lacking in any animal products. He doesn't use meat, dairy, eggs, or oil. He keeps his fat intake very low because he wants his blood sugars to stay great. Ken Thomas knows that keeping blood sugar levels normal is going to promote the best health that a type 1 diabetic can have. And so Ken has chosen to share his success stories with others, and he has helped many, many people get much better control of both type 1 and type 2 diabetes just by sharing his stories. For Ken's blog alone, sign up at www.starchsmart.com. It's free. You'll find short biographies of these doctors who have pioneered the way in the plant-based movement on my website, www.drcarney.com. You'll find helpful short articles and photographs of many of the physicians and scientists who have pioneered the plant-based diet and this medical research. You'll find them on www.drcarney.com, which is my website that shows many of the scientific underpinnings of why I advocate the advice that I do. What should you eat for breakfast for best blood sugar control? When you eat beans, greens, squash, and yams for breakfast, these 4 categories of food stabilize blood sugar with their protein and fiber load in such a way that type 2 diabetes becomes much less likely. Or if you have it, it's much easier to control and, yes, reverse. Eating beans, greens, squash, and yams for breakfast also cuts food cravings and helps you to lose down to a normal weight, so that weight loss becomes much easier than with other types of breakfast. Eating beans, greens, squash, and yams for breakfast before 8 a.m. can make a huge difference in how much energy you feel. But if you're still hungry after eating beans, greens, squash, and yams, then add in intact whole grains such as quinoa, barley, brown rice, oatmeal, or whole wheat if you're eating wheat. If you can eat that wheat sprouted, such as Ezekiel 4:9 bread, that's the best form. There are tools that can help you be successful in transitioning to a low-fat, plant-based lifestyle. One of my favorite tools is the Instant Pot. The Instant Pot is a pressure cooker that's electronic. The inner lining is just stainless steel. There's no nonstick. Why no nonstick in the Instant Pot? Because at high pressures inside a pressure cooker, the nonstick can flake off into the food, and some people believe that this may cause cancer. The Instant Pot is a pressure cooker that can cut your cooking time down dramatically. It cuts cooking time down to 1/3, and yet it locks in flavor. The Instant Pot is a slow cooker, a rice cooker, a steamer, a sautéer, and an electronic pressure cooker all in one. And I think that the Instant Pot has made my life a lot easier because I don't have a lot of time to cook. Here's my number 1 reason for using an Instant Pot. When I approach bedtime and it's time to go to sleep and I need to make sure that I've got food for the next day, perhaps I'll take, let's say, a squash, a butternut squash. I don't peel it, I don't cut it. I just wash the outside and I put it inside my Instant Pot with a little bit of water. And I turn it on to the proper setting and push go, and then I go to bed. And after it's done cooking, it stays warm all night. Fresh, hot squash for breakfast. And it never burns and it never spoils because it's just kept at the right temperature. And that's my kind of cooking because it only takes me about 5 minutes to load the Instant Pot at night before I go to bed. You can cook whole grains in it on the multigrain setting. You can cook beans in it. Especially helpful is the ability to cook beans that have been soaking all day, and then you can rinse them, and that rinses away all the gas from the beans, and then you can cook them, and when they're done cooking, they stay warm. You can also put them on the slow cooker setting if you choose to do it that way. Another tool that has made my life much, much happier is the Dutch oven. I like a Dutch oven that's not made of cast iron. I have a stainless steel one from Calphalon. Why no cast iron Dutch oven like I used to use? The reason is iron can flake off from the cast iron cooking utensil or pot into the food. Iron in food could be implicated in causes of Alzheimer's disease. But doctor, you say, how can I live without oil? Well, there are 3 things you need to know to live without oil. Number 1, what do you do for a salad dressing? Number 2, how do you saute onions in a skillet without oil? Number 3, how do you bake without oil? Let's take them one at a time. Number 1, salad dressings. If you can put a small amount of water and a small amount of rinsed raw walnuts in a blender, this can be the start of a dressing that could incorporate a tablespoon of flax seeds, a tablespoon of walnuts, and water with some lemon or lime juice and some seasonings such as onion, garlic, dill, and sage. If you use salt, you can add some salt in there, but that's optional. This makes a very nice dressing, and if you would like it to be green, add in a handful of cilantro if you like cilantro, or basil, or tarragon. What about substitutes? Giving up dairy is very hard because dairy is addicting. The casein in cow's milk bonds with our endorphins from the pleasure center to make casomorphines, and this makes people feel very blissful, very euphoric. It makes you feel really good. That makes all cheese and yogurt products more doubly addicting than just their taste. How do we substitute so that we can get through the cravings, the withdrawals from dairy? Silken tofu in a box can be a good substitute that you can make into sour cream, whipped cream, and other dressings. Cashews, water, and nutritional yeast in a blender can make a sauce that's very much like melted cheese. But won't I be hungry all the time, you ask? No. Look at this picture with the 3 stomachs. The stomach that's full has 400 calories. The stomach that's almost empty also has 400 calories. What's the difference? The packaging. The stomach that's almost empty has a small amount of oil in it because oil is the most calorie-concentrated food on the planet. Oil has about 4,000 calories per pound. But the stomach that's full of fruits and vegetables there has 400 calories and it can't hold another bite. You see, the food has filled up the stomach. It has stretched out the stretch receptors of the stomach. The food weighs something. It has activated the stomach's weight receptors. And so that stomach feels full, satisfied. What causes satiety? It's not the amount of calories. It's the amount of bulk. Where does bulk come from? Bulk comes from a combination of water and fiber. But how many calories do water and fiber have? 0. And that's why fiber is the weight loss miracle. Oil has had all the fiber stripped out of it, which makes oil a very calorie-dense food indeed. Also, nuts and seeds are just below oil in the calorie density scale. Nuts and seeds are approximately 2,800 calories per pound, and stomachs can hold about a pound of food in the adult, give or take, depending on the size of the adult. Number 2. How to saute onions in a skillet without oil. Well, if you would like to saute onions, you need a very hot pan. You can use nonstick if you choose, but you don't have to have a nonstick pan. But you do need sprinkles of water on the hot pan and constant ladling with your spatula. When you do this, just as the onions start to stick and brown, and you keep shoveling them off with the spatula and sprinkles of water, you can get good sauteed onions without using any oil at all. If you choose to simmer your onions, of course you can douse them with water, but that's a different recipe than sauteed. Number 3, how do you bake without oil and get delicious moist baked goods? The substitutes that you can use for oil in baked goods include mashed banana, applesauce, and canned pumpkin that's pureed. All these things can keep your baked goods moist without oil. What resources are there out there that are free? www.pcrm.org. That stands for Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. This site is run by Dr. Neil Barnard, MD, and his team. He has helped many people reverse their type 2 diabetes, and his book is not only one of the best resources and cookbooks for diabetics, but his website has great recipes. And if you sign up for their newsletter, they'll send you the recipe of the week, complete with pictures. The Forks Over Knives Plan is a book that incorporates a cookbook, and the doctors who were featured in Forks Over Knives, Doctors Matt Letterman and his wife Alona Pulde, these are both medical doctors who were featured in the movie Forks Over Knives to help the people reverse their diabetes, to lower their blood pressure, to lower their cholesterol. Their book is well written, and it provides a great overview of what you need to know to successfully outrun your type 2 diabetes. I hope that as you've listened to some of these tips on how to outrun type 2 diabetes, how to reverse it, how to make sure that you never get it, I hope that you have found that you can take the control into your hands of your own health. You see, many people feel that they're at the mercy of their genetics, but it doesn't have to be so for you. There are lifestyle principles, fresh air, exercise, water, rest, abstinence from harmful things, a low-fat plant-based diet, and trusting in God's love that can make a big difference for your health. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, I'm Dr. Linda Carney.